Welcome to another lecture by MedicoMedics, Anatomy Chapter 6, the Digestive System. In this lecture, we will talk about the functions and the anatomy of the digestive system. We will mention the alimentary canal, small intestine, large intestine, its accessory organs, the process of digestion, and mention some digestive disorders, some clinical tools we use, and end with a summary. Now let's begin with the functions of the digestive system. So we start off with ingestion, which is the intake of food and liquids. Second, we have digestion. So now we are talking about the breakdown of food into smaller molecules. After that, we're talking about absorption, so nutrient transfer into our bloodstream. And finally, elimination, so the removal of indigestible substances and waste. Now let's begin with the anatomy of the digestive system. So it is, like the respiratory system, also divided into two main groups. Here we have the alimentary canal, or the GI tract, which includes the mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, the small and large intestines, and the anus. And then we have the accessory organs. So these are our salivary glands, our liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Now let's focus in on the alimentary canal. So we have the mouth. So our teeth break down food. This is part of the mechanical digestion. We then had saliva, which contains enzymes like amylase. We call it the chemical digestion. Furthermore, we have the pharynx and the esophagus. These conduct food to the stomach through the process of peristalsis. So imagine you have this tube and you have this piece of food here. Now you have muscles running along these walls, let's say. When these contract, they will create this pressure for this food to be pushed further down, and then this repeats itself. And this food gets further pushed down. This is called peristalsis. Now then, once the food has traveled through the esophagus and has arrived in our stomach, as we mentioned before, the stomach produces gastric juice like hydrochloric acid and different enzymes to digest the intake. So we have, for example, the enzyme pepsin, which is assisting in the breakdown of proteins. We have gastric lipase involved in the breakdown of fats. And in the stomach, food is churned into chyme. So we started with, let's say, our burger here, that we take a bite of this burger into our mouth, and then we are chewing it, or by the process of mastication, chewing. This food gets broken down, and then we had our salivary glands producing enzymes like amylase, helping in the chemical digestion. This will lead to the production of something called a bolus. This is a moist mass of food. Now the tongue will then push this bolus down into our pharynx, where it is directed into the esophagus. And the esophagus uses these so-called rhythmic muscle contractions, or peristalsis, to propel the bolus towards the stomach. Now once it arrives here, the stomach has a very acidic environment because it contains hydrochloric acid, and this is a very strong acid present in the stomach, which is secreted by our parietal cells of the gastric glands. Now it plays a lot of crucial roles. So it acidifies the stomach contents, which leads to the maintaining of a pH around 1.5 to 3.5, which is very acidic. But there are a lot of advantages to this. First of all, different microorganisms that have entered into our body will get destroyed because of this acidic environment. So it's not friendly to pathogens. It helps in facilitating absorption because it helps dissolve certain nutrients like iron and calcium, making them easier to be absorbed once they travel to the intestine. Furthermore, once it is here in the stomach, we call it chyme. So how did we arrive from this hamburger to chyme? Like we said, in the first step, we get this bolus. This bolus then is able to travel down to the stomach, where it is churned into chyme. And slowly, this chyme is then released into the duodenum, which is the first part after the stomach towards our first small intestine. And this occurs through this gateway called the pyloric sphincter. So we have different sphincters placed here and there. We have one here between the stomach and the duodenum, or the beginning of our small intestine, called the pyloric sphincter. Similarly, we had the lower esophageal sphincter, which is sort of a door between the esophagus and the stomach. And then when this chyme has entered into the small intestine, further digestion and absorption occurs. Now let's talk a little bit about the small intestine. So it is the major site for digestion and absorption. The small intestine is divided into the duodenum, where chyme is received, as we just mentioned, once it passes slowly through the pyloric sphincter, which separates the stomach from the initial part of the small intestine. That part is the duodenum. Chyme is arriving here, together with bile and pancreatic enzymes. You will later learn the role of the pancreas here and the role of the liver in relation to the small intestine. Another part is the jejunum, where nutrients like carbohydrates and proteins are absorbed. And then we have the ileum, where a lot of vitamins, for example, B12, and bile salts are absorbed. To facilitate an increase of absorption, the surface area of this intestine is increased by villi and microvilli. Now then to the large intestine. So here, water and electrolytes are mainly absorbed. It forms and stores feces. It houses gut microbiota, which aids in digestion and immune function. It includes, so the large intestine includes the cecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anus, as you can see here. And this little thing here is the appendix. So food travels in from the small intestine through the cecum into the colon, into the ascending colon. And this is quite high yield, so make sure you remember these names. So we have the ascending colon, which means it's ascending, right? Then we have the transverse colon, where food continues. Well, it's not food at this point. It then continues down the descending colon into the rectum, finally into the anus, and here we have sphincters that are under voluntary control. So when we're ready and we feel the pressure here, we then go and sit at the bathroom, and after that we feel happy. Now let's mention some accessory organs. So we have the liver, which produces bile to emulsify fats. It further has the function of detoxifying blood and storing glycogen. It has a lot more functions than that, but for now, let's leave it here. We then have the gallbladder, which sits under the liver. It stores and releases bile into the small intestine. Furthermore, we have the pancreas, where digestive enzymes like lipase and amylase and proteases are secreted. It also produces bicarbonate to neutralize stomach acid. So let's just have a small repetition here where we have an illustration starting with food into our mouth, right? We have the chewing in the oral cavity. We have the formation of a bolus with the tongue pushing it down through the pharynx, down the esophagus. Through the process of peristalsis, we reach the stomach. In the stomach, we have the initial breakdown due to the presence of hydrochloric acid, creating this acidic environment. Both pathogens that are not supposed to enter our body gets killed, and different nutrients like iron and calcium, etc., get broken down or dissolved due to this hydrochloric acid. Then we also have, for example, the breakdown of protein via the enzyme pepsin. So the food then in the stomach or it's now called chyme, because if you remember, we started with food and then it became a bolus, and in the stomach it is churned into chyme. This chyme then, via the opening of the pyloric sphincter, enters into the initial part of our small intestine, which is the duodenum. It then continues through the jejunum and the ileum down to the large intestine. In the large intestine, we had the ascending colon, we had the transverse colon, and then the descending colon, finally arriving at the rectum and finally at the anus, ready to get excreted from our body. So some digestive disorders then. We have gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD, which is acid reflux causing heartburn. We have peptic ulcers, so erosion of stomach lining, often caused by the pathogen Helicobacter pylori, if my memory serves me right. Then we have celiac disease, so it's an autoimmune reaction to the ingestion of gluten. We have something called irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, functional disorder of the colon. We can have, in our accessory organ, we have something like hepatitis, inflammation of the liver. Now, these are just a handful. We have a lot of them, and we will mention most of them in the course on gastroenterology and in our studies of physiology and pathophysiology. We can briefly mention two very important diagnostic tools. So we have the endoscopy, where we visualize the GI tract. So if we have a person here, all right, we take a tube down in towards the stomach. This is endoscopy. We have, in opposite to that, we have colonoscopy, where we go upwards from down under, where we examine the colon and the rectum. So in summary then, the digestive system processes food into nutrients and eliminates waste. The alimentary canal and its accessory organs work in harmony. Digestion involves mechanical breakdown and chemical processing. And that's the end of chapter 6. Continue now to chapter 7.